All right, let's put some finishing touches on this simple composite image. Once again, the idea behind a lot of these early tutorials is to give you a chance to work through some of the different tools as well as understand some of the concepts and vocabulary. So we're going to get into some things that will look amazing when you're done, and you'll also have some time to do some freeform stuff as well. So this is just building a foundation. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and delete this background layer. Now, the reason we moved this into a different sized image is you're going to need to be able to design for websites or design for an application so that it views on a phone. This is going to be more of like a phone style format. So being able to have things that you create in one format that's much wider to being able to move it into a different format. So that was the main reason I wanted to have you move the stuff over and then fumble through that Shift Alt kind of thing. So if you run into problems with that, definitely hit me up. I'll help you with it. In class, it's much easier because people can watch my hand when I do that when I sit next to you and help you. But in a online environment, a little trickier to do. So if you ran into problems with that, no shame. Hit me up. I'll help you out. Okay, let's bust through the last part of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the soccer layer. I want to switch to the text tool, and I'm going to click here. Now, oftentimes it takes a little while for Photopea to load this, so it's taking a moment. It's loading the font. And because this is a larger image, even though this is 24-point font, it's pretty small. So I'm going to zoom way in. So I just press Control Plus. Now I'm using the Shift key to hold the mouse button down and click. And there is the text box. So it's pretty small. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to worry too much about that. I'm going to go ahead and delete that by dragging it to the trash can. I'm going to zoom out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to preset it and make it a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and make this, I don't know, like 95 or so. It doesn't need to be perfect right now because we're going to resize it. And then now I'm going to click on the text tool. Now I can see it a little bit more. What you're going to do is type in TRES space BOLAS. And let's go ahead and find a different font to use. Now with this, I'm okay if you choose something else, but I want to show you a couple things with the fonts that are here. These are different types of fonts. So I'm going to click on all, and then I'm going to turn them all off. This is showing all the fonts that I've installed into Photopea. So if you have some, that's fine. If you don't see these, not a big deal. But what I want to do is I want to show you in this little slider, this is a whole variety of different kinds of fonts. So if you decide, I'm doing something for like the military and I want to stamp something in, maybe you choose a stencil and it's showing just stencil fonts. Maybe you decide, I want to have something that's got more of a script, like a flowing handwritten kind of effect. All right, I click on script. And now it's filtering these and only showing the ones that are script. Now, we're going to learn a lot more about these type categories. And this one actually has quite a few more than what we're going to get into. But this is a way to be able to trim down the amount of fonts that are being shown. Because I find oftentimes students will just choose the very first one, like, yay. Or you'll choose the default font. That is so beyond basic. You don't want that. You want to actually take a little bit of time and decide, I'll do a comic book one and see what's there. So this one here, Dingbats, isn't going to be really useful. I'll show you a video at some point about what these Dingbats are. Like, why is there guns? I don't know. We'll turn that one off. Calligraphy ones are a little tricky to read sometimes, but sometimes it can be cool. So I'm fine with whatever font you want to end up using. I'm going to go ahead and just use this one that I had downloaded. This is American Captain. It's like a Captain America font. I got that one off to font and loaded it. All right, so with the fonts, with this, when I highlight here, this is only available in regular. It's also, you notice, all in capitals. Some fonts that you get, especially the free ones, may only be available in capitals. They don't have a bold that's available. They don't have an italic that's available. So you'd have to pay for that version. Now over here, this is the size. So when I drag this slider, but notice it caps out at 150. If I wanted to go larger than that, I can actually highlight inside of here and I can just type in a number and hit enter. and then it makes it bigger. So that's one way to change the size. I'm going to go ahead and switch this one. Your font size is going to vary because each font is constructed differently. So I'm not going to be able to give you an exact number unless you're using the exact same font that I'm using. And I click away and now I can move it. Now I'm going to switch back to the text tool again. Now here's a way you can select the text automatically. See the little preview over here on the layers? You've got the T. If you double click on that, it highlights the text for you. The reason that's important is, I'm going to hit check mark, is if you move your mouse over this and you don't click, notice how it changes. I've got my arrow and then it changes to a cursor. If I click here, it just made a brand new text layer. And it's empty, but you're going to end up with an extra text layer. And especially with Photopea, it's going to run slower the more layers you have. So I'm going to delete that. So one way to get around that is just come to the text layer you want and just double click, and it will actually highlight the entire text. Now you can also go in here and change, do you want it centered, right aligned, or left aligned? I'll explain later when we do other stuff with typography why it didn't actually line up with the edges. This is just about the text box. This piece right here will allow you to change the color. So for this Trace Bolas, what you're going to do is go ahead and choose whatever font you want. And then I'm going to show you a way of how I would set up the color, but you can totally do it different. I'm going to go ahead and choose like a darker blue for now, just for the sake of changing it. And now notice it's kind of hard to read. If I put it up here, it's easier to read. I put it down there, it's relatively easy to read. But once I run text over something, it makes it really hard to read. That's a pretty easy area. But right there, I don't like this part. It's kind of distracting. So I'm going to show you a couple ways we can just add a couple quick things on here to make it look a little bit more interesting. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the soccer layer, and I'm going to come over here to the tools, and I'm going to grab this rectangle tool. Now, I'm going to take this rectangle tool, I'm going to make it active. So now there's a little black box there. And I'm going to come up above where the text is, but I'm going to come slightly outside of the image. And I'm going to hold my mouse button down, and I'm going to drag. What this does is it creates a specialized layer that's called a shape. The thing that's nice with this shape layer is it's maneuverable, meaning I can go in and change the size of it by grabbing any of these bounding boxes. I can don't click in the center, but if I click off slightly to the side, I can move this around and line it up with the text. Now I can also go in and I can change the color of it. Actually move that over. This comes up sometimes, and this is super annoying, where the thing expands. There's these two little brackets right here, the greater than and less than sign. If you click on that, it'll shrink it back down. Now, in order to change this color, I have to make sure the layer is selected, and I have to have the rectangle tool selected. Right up here, now this is going to allow me to change the color. Now I'm going to show you a cool little trick. If I click on here, I'm going to move this over. I'm going to start moving my mouse around in the photo. And notice what it's doing. It's actually selecting pixels or colors that are inside of the image. So one of the ways to get color in an image to look good is to choose another dominant color that's in the photo. So I can maybe choose up here. I kind of like this yellow now that I'm thinking about it. That yellow and blue is a great complementary color in contrast. So that's kind of cool. I'm going to click OK. You can choose to change the color to something else. I'm fine with that. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to line the text layer up perfectly centered on the shape. Now I could try to eyeball it and move this around, but sometimes it snaps in place and it messes up. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to purposely move it out of the way. I'm going to select the shape layer, and I'm going to hold down the shift key, and I'm going to click on the text layer. Across the top here, as long as you have your move tool selected, you have these options for lining things up. You can line things up along the top, the center, and the bottom, or you could line things up along the left side, the center, or the right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to center that. So now that just moved it over. If I click there, Notice it's kicking it off of the page. The reason is the shape is off of the page. I'm going to line that up in the center. And then I'm going to line them up centered vertically. So right now it's centered horizontally, but now when I choose this one, it centers them perfectly. And then now that both of these layers are selected, I can actually use the arrow key to move these around. I'm going to move it down slightly below the house a little bit. Now, I think that yellow is a little too strong. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the soccer layer and I'm going to go back and click on the shape layer. And now here's another spot in the layers that we haven't really touched on much, opacity. I'm going to click on the opacity. Opacity refers to how solid or how see-through that area is. So notice when I bring this all the way down, look how hard it is to read the text when it runs across the grass. That color contrast, especially where it goes inside of the letters, makes it really hard to read. But when it's here, it's almost too strong. So I'm going to go ahead and fade that out just a little bit. And this is going to depend on the color you used. I would just want to make sure that the text itself is the easiest to see. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about, how you can kind of see through that. So with this one, I just lowered it. If I go too far down, it makes it harder to read. If I go too far up, it just looks like a sticker. So I'm going to load that down just a little bit, give it kind of an effect. And then I'm going to click on the text again. I'm going to duplicate this text layer, and we're going to do a fake drop shadow. So right here, we're not going to use an effect. We're actually going to use an old style way of making a drop shadow. So I'm going to turn off this top layer. So I duplicated the text. I'm going to double click on the T. I'm going to double click on the color, and I'm going to choose a darker version of the color. Just by moving it down, it's going to add more black. So depending on what color you used, we're going to make a darker version of it. So now there's a dark version, and when I turn on the visibility, there's a light version. But since they're on top of each other, you can't see it. What I'm going to do is with this bottom one selected, I'm going to change the name of this. I'm just going to add in shadow. I'm going to try to spell shadow correctly. There we go. Shadow. And now with the move tool selected, I'm going to use my arrow key, my right arrow key. I'm going to press it 1, 2, 3 times. See how it's starting to make a shadow? There's 4, 5, and then I'm going to move it down a couple times. What this does is it creates kind of a shadowed effect, just like that. Real simple, subtle way to make the text pop off of the background a little bit more. I'm going to click on that one. I'm going to click on basketball just to move that out of the way, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see the text. It makes it so that the text is a little bit easier to read, plus there's a little bit of an effect. Not super hard to do. It's just a matter of duplicating the text and slightly moving it down and to the right. And that is the finished piece. Now, actually, that will be the last thing we're going to do. We're going to move on to the next one. So now what you want to do is go ahead and save this as a PSD file. And then after you save it as a PSD file, that PSD file is the thing that you're going to turn into the assignment section.